They say the older you get, the quieter life becomes. I used to believe that meant peace, mornings with tea, an old radio humming in the background, a garden full of roses that never asked for more than sunlight and water. But I've learned that quiet doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it's just the sound of people forgetting you exist. I'm Margaret Holloway, retired nurse, widow, 71 years old. I live in a modest cottage just outside Fairview, a town where people wave from their cars even if they don't remember your name. My husband Harold built this house with his own hands, long before money and status started deciding who was worth listening to. He passed 12 years ago, but his laughter still echoes in these walls when I dust the mantel or open a jar he sealed too tightly decades ago. My days are simple now. Tea at dawn, a stroll down to the bakery, reading on the porch. I have no driver, no staff, no extravagant jewelry that catches light at every turn. What I have is freedom, though, apparently, that's not as impressive as a luxury car or a photo in a magazine spread. My son Michael married a woman named Clarissa Westwood 5 years ago. She's everything I never was. Tall, sharp, ambitious, with a smile that could sell glass to a blind man. Clarissa runs the Fairview Hope Foundation, a charity, at least on paper, and she's become somewhat of a local celebrity. The newspapers adore her, the city elites attend her events, and she thrives in their glow. At first, I wanted to like her, for Michael's sake. But I quickly learned that to Clarissa, people are props. And a woman who wears second-hand shoes doesn't fit her stage. She never said it outright, of course. Clarissa is far too polished for that. But she has her ways, the subtle glances when I bring homemade cookies instead of store-bought gifts, the delicate smile when she says, "Oh, Margaret, you don't really need to worry about money, we'll take care of you." As if I were her charity project. I remember one particular morning, spring, soft sunlight slipping through my kitchen curtains. I had just finished watering the roses when my phone buzzed with a message from her. "Mother Margaret, we'd love for you to attend the annual Hope Gala this year. It's extra special. We're honoring our family's commitment to generosity. Dress formal to hearts." Formal. That single word made me pause. The last time I wore something formal was at my husband's funeral. I stared at that message for a long moment, feeling something stir inside me. The word generosity lingered too, bitter and ironic. Because Clarissa wouldn't know true generosity if it kissed her jeweled hand. Still, I decided to go. Not for her, but for Michael. I wanted him to know his mother still cared enough to show up. The week before the event, Clarissa came by. She swept into my home as if she owned it, her perfume arriving 5 seconds before she did. "Mother Margaret," she chirped, her tone all honey and glass. "I thought I'd stop by and help you pick something suitable for the gala. It's going to be televised this year." Televised. Of course. Everything with Clarissa had to be seen, documented, applauded. "I'm sure I'll find something," I said, dusting my hands on my apron. "I still have my navy dress from the hospital's retirement dinner." Her face flickered, just a second, before the polite smile returned. "Oh, darling, that must be vintage." I suppose that's one way to describe it. She perched on the edge of my sofa, crossing her legs so smoothly you'd think she'd rehearsed it. "You know, Michael and I have been thinking. The cottage is lovely, but it's so far from the city. And with the new baby coming, we really need a bigger space. The foundation is doing so well, it's just logical for us to invest in a family home. Yours is so cozy and sentimental." It took me a heartbeat to understand what she was suggesting. She wanted my house. "Are you asking me to move out?" I asked quietly. She laughed, that high, practiced laugh that makes strangers believe she's charming. "Oh no, of course not. I just thought, maybe you'd consider downsizing. There's a senior living complex opening soon, very posh, lots of company your age." There it was. A gentle eviction wrapped in false concern. I smiled, though I could feel my pulse thudding. "I'll think about it," I lied. She squeezed my hand as if sealing a deal. "You're so understanding. It's what I adore about you." When she left, her perfume still lingered in the air, expensive, overpowering. I opened every window just to breathe again. The day of the gala arrived with rain that glittered like pearls on my windowpane. I stood before my small mirror, smoothing the navy dress that had once made me feel proud. It fit a little tighter now, my shoulders a little smaller, but I didn't care. I pinned my silver hair up, added my mother's brooch, and told myself Harold would have smiled if he could see me. The ballroom at the Fairview Grand Hotel was a world away from my quiet kitchen. Crystal chandeliers, champagne laughter, dresses that shimmered like rivers of gold. Cameras flashed. People glided past with rehearsed elegance. And there I was, an old nurse in a navy dress, walking into a world built on pretense. Clarissa spotted me immediately. "Oh, you made it!" she exclaimed, kissing the air near my cheek. "How lovely!" She guided me through the crowd, introducing me as Michael's dear mother, the one who taught us the value of humility. The words were sweet, but her tone was a dagger wrapped in silk. I smiled at everyone, but inside I was trembling, not from fear, but from an ache that comes when you realize you're being paraded, not respected. Dinner was served, speeches made, glasses clinked. Clarissa took the stage in a glittering silver gown, her voice smooth and confident. "Tonight," she began, "we celebrate generosity, the lifeblood of this foundation. We honor those who give selflessly, even when they have little." Her eyes found mine in the crowd. "And speaking of that, we have a very special guest with us tonight. My mother-in-law, Margaret Holloway, a woman of admirable modesty." Polite laughter rippled through the room. I felt my throat tighten. She continued, smiling wider. "Margaret has always been content with simplicity, a small home, a quiet life. But tonight, we hope to inspire her to see how much more we can do when we think bigger. Don't we, everyone?" Applause. Camera flashes. The room spun for a second. Clarissa, my own daughter-in-law, had just used me as a symbol of small dreams, a public prop to elevate herself. I didn't stand. I didn't clap. I just sat there, every heartbeat sharpening my resolve. I had spent a lifetime staying quiet, as a nurse, as a wife, as a mother. But silence, I've learned, is often mistaken for weakness. Clarissa had no idea what I was capable of. Later that evening, as the auction began, I slipped away to the side of the stage. My heart beat steadily, calmly, almost eagerly. I had written a short note earlier, folded neatly in my clutch. When the host announced the next auction item, I stepped forward. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady but firm. The microphone feedback caught the room's attention. Heads turned. Clarissa's smile faltered. "Margaret, dear," she began, but I raised a hand. "I won't take much of your time," I said. "I just wanted to share something, since tonight is all about generosity." A polite hush settled over the audience. Cameras clicked. I've attended this event for many years, quietly, from the back row. And while my lifestyle might not sparkle, I continued, I've always believed true giving doesn't need an audience. Clarissa shifted on her heels. "Mother Margaret." "Yes," I said evenly, "that's what your letterhead calls me, though the foundation knows me by a different name. The Elm Benefactor, I believe." A murmur spread. The name was well known, the mysterious donor who had kept the foundation alive for nearly a decade. Clarissa's painted smile froze. I turned to the crowd. "For years, I've made anonymous donations to ensure this charity's work continued, believing it was reaching people in need. But tonight, I learned that generosity has been confused with spectacle." Gasps rippled. Someone whispered my name. I drew a slow breath. "So, I'd like to make an announcement. The Elm Benefactor will no longer be funding the Fairview Hope Foundation. Instead, the donations will go to the Children's Outreach Network, where every penny is accounted for. The room erupted. Flashes, murmurs, whispers. Clarissa's face drained of color. "You can't just—" "Oh, but I can," I said softly, leaning closer so only she could hear. "And I will. Unless, of course, you'd like to correct something else, publicly." Her jaw clenched. "What do you want?" "A simple apology," I said, "for what you did tonight." She stared at me, then at the cameras, her chest rising with anger she couldn't afford to show. "I'm sorry if I embarrassed you," she said through a brittle smile. "That was never my intention." "No," I said gently. "Not to me. To everyone here." For a moment, I thought she'd refuse. But Clarissa understood the weight of reputation better than anyone. She turned to the microphone. "I'd like to apologize," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "My words earlier were thoughtless. True generosity deserves respect, no matter how it appears." Applause filled the room, hesitant, then warm. I smiled, nodded to the audience, and stepped back. The cameras followed me as I left the stage. But what none of them knew, not yet, was that this was only the beginning. Because when truth starts to crack the surface, greed tends to spill out all on its own. The night air outside the Fairview Grand smelled of rain and roses, a strange mix of endings and beginnings. The ballroom doors closed behind me, muffling the noise, but my heart still thudded in rhythm with the echo of applause. For a long moment, I just stood there under the canopy lights, breathing. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the release of something I had carried too long. Silence had been my armor for years, but it had also been my cage. Tonight, I had finally opened the door. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I walked along the wet pavement, my heels clicking softly. The city felt different, freer somehow. Or maybe it was just me. People talk about revenge as if it's loud, fiery, and cruel. But real revenge, I think, is quieter. It's the sound of dignity reclaiming its voice. When I returned home, the house welcomed me like an old friend. Soft lights, the ticking clock, the faint smell of lavender. I slipped off my shoes and set them neatly by the door. For a moment, I imagined Harold sitting in his armchair, newspaper in hand, giving me that proud half-smile he used to wear when I did something unexpected. "You'd have been proud of me tonight," I whispered into the stillness. "I didn't let her take everything." The words hung in the air like a promise. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. 10 missed calls. All from Michael. 1 from Clarissa. I didn't answer. Not yet. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window. Outside, the rain had turned to mist, curling around the garden like breath. It was strange, how peace and chaos can exist in the same moment. By morning, my quiet little home had become the center of a storm. The phone rang non-stop, reporters, board members, people from the hospital where I once worked. Even the morning news anchor mentioned me by name. The anonymous donor known as the Elm Benefactor has been revealed as retired nurse Margaret Holloway. Hearing it felt surreal. My secret, something I had guarded for nearly 10 years, was now a headline. When I first started donating, it wasn't about recognition. It was gratitude. After Harold died, I had more money than I needed. Investments he'd made decades ago had grown beyond anything we expected. So I gave quietly, in his honor, to help others. I never wanted credit, just purpose. But watching Clarissa twist charity into performance had changed something in me. Michael came by that afternoon. I knew he would. My son has never been good at staying away when things fall apart. He looks like Harold in the eyes, but where Harold had calm, Michael has confusion, the kind that comes from living between two worlds. He walked in without knocking. "Mom, what the hell happened last night?" I looked up from my cup of tea. "Good afternoon to you too, darling." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Clarissa's devastated. The board's calling emergency meetings. The press is camped outside our house. You blindsided her, Mom. I told the truth, I said simply. He stared at me. But you humiliated her, in front of everyone. I smiled softly. She did that herself, Michael. I just stopped pretending not to notice. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. I could see the conflict behind his eyes. Love for his mother, loyalty to his wife. It tore at him, just as it had torn at me to stay silent all these years. She's not a bad person, he said finally, almost pleading. No one starts out bad, I said. But greed has a way of blinding people. You know, I watched Clarissa build that charity from the ground up. I was proud once, until the sparkle turned into smoke. He sank into the chair across from me. You could have talked to her privately. I tried, I said quietly. But she doesn't hear whispers, only applause. He didn't have an answer to that. After a long silence, he said, She's scared, Mom. Really scared. They're already auditing her accounts. Something in his tone shifted, softer now, uncertain. Michael, I said, if there's anything you're not telling me. He shook his head quickly. No, it's just, you know how she is with money. She pushes boundaries. She says it's all temporary, part of growth. I nodded. Growth. That was always her word. But weeds grow, too, fast, wild, choking the flowers if you don't pull them soon enough. Tell her, I said gently, that the only thing that's temporary is fame built on lies. He looked at me for a long time, then stood. You've changed, Mom. I've remembered who I am, I said. When he left, I felt both lighter and lonelier. By evening, the news had turned from curiosity to scandal. The headlines were merciless. Hope Foundation under investigation after donor pulls support. Where did the money go? Charity faces scrutiny after anonymous benefactor's revelation. I didn't feel joy reading them, only a quiet ache. It's strange, watching someone you once welcomed into your home fall apart. There's a kind of grief in it, even when they brought it on themselves. Clarissa called that night. Her voice was thin, like glass about to crack. Margaret, how could you? I told the truth, I said again. You've ruined everything, she hissed. Do you have any idea what people are saying about me? I imagine, I replied softly. They're saying what I once whispered to myself but never dared to admit. You think you're better than me because you kept your money a secret? Because you played the saint while I worked myself to the bone? No, I said quietly. I think I'm lucky. Because I learned the difference between helping people and performing goodness. For a moment, I heard her breathing hard on the other end, that sharp, shallow kind of breath that comes from panic. Michael still loves you, she said, her voice breaking slightly. But you've made it impossible for him. That's not true, I said gently. It's never impossible to love your mother, or your wife. It's just harder when both are mirrors. She hung up without another word. The next few days blurred into a storm of news clips, statements, and interviews. I avoided them all. Instead, I spent my mornings in the garden, trimming the roses Harold planted the summer before he passed. The soil was damp and dark beneath my gloves. There's something grounding about gardening, the patience, the quiet labor. Each snip of the shears reminded me that pruning isn't cruelty, it's care. By the end of the week, the foundation's accounts were frozen. Several board members resigned. Clarissa's glamorous face, once plastered across charity magazines, now appeared under grim headlines. People stopped calling her the darling of Fairview. Now, she was the socialite under scrutiny. I didn't smile at her fall. I didn't gloat. But I did feel balance. And balance, after all these years, felt like mercy. Michael came again a week later. He looked tired, the way people do when they've been living on too many apologies and not enough sleep. "Mom," he said, "they found discrepancies. Clarissa moved money, personal accounts, offshore stuff. It's bad." I put down my teacup. "And you?" "I didn't know," he said quickly. "I swear I didn't know." I believed him. My son had his flaws, pride, stubbornness, but deceit wasn't one of them. He sank into the chair, burying his face in his hands. "She's talking about leaving the country." I sighed. "Running doesn't erase guilt, Michael. It only delays the reckoning." He looked up, eyes red. "She says you destroyed her life." I reached across the table and took his hand. "I didn't destroy her, darling. I just stopped protecting her lies." He nodded slowly, tears welling. "She's pregnant, Mom." My heart clenched. Oh! That single word carried 100 emotions: sorrow, compassion, disbelief. He whispered, "I don't know what to do." "Then don't rush," I said softly. "Sometimes stillness is the only way to hear what's right." We sat like that for a long time, mother and son, silence binding us in fragile understanding. Later that night, as the house grew quiet again, I stood by the window watching the moon rise. It hung low and pale, casting silver light over the garden. I thought of Clarissa, alone in her mansion, curtains drawn, the echo of her own ambition turning into something she couldn't control. I didn't hate her. Not really. Hatred is heavy, and I've carried enough weight in my lifetime. What I felt was pity, and a faint, aching hope that maybe one day she'd understand that kindness and humility are not weaknesses. Generosity doesn't seek recognition, but it demands respect. That was the lesson Harold taught me. And tonight, it finally lived through me. When I turned off the lights and went to bed, I whispered a quiet prayer, not for revenge, but for peace. For all of us. Because even in betrayal, there's room for redemption. But redemption, like generosity, cannot be forced. It must be chosen. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for Fairview's fascination with the scandal to shift from outrage to pity. In the beginning, every paper carried Clarissa's name. By the end of the month, she'd become just another forgotten headline, a cautionary tale whispered over brunch. For me, the silence that followed was heavier than the noise had been. Each morning I still rose early, boiled water, and waited for the kettle's soft whistle. But something about the quiet had changed. It wasn't loneliness anymore, it was reflection, the kind that seeps into your bones when the world finally stops shouting. I spent those mornings writing letters. Not to send, just to understand. Letters to Harold, to Michael, even to Clarissa. They helped me make sense of what pride and pain had done to all of us. One gray afternoon, Michael appeared again. No warning this time, just the sound of tires on the gravel path and his familiar knock, 3 soft raps that always made the door tremble. He looked thinner, older somehow. "Can I come in?" "You never have to ask," I said. Inside, he wandered the living room like a man searching for something he'd misplaced. "She's agreed to meet with the investigators," he said finally. "She's terrified, Mom. The money trail's messy, but she swears she can explain." I poured him tea. "And do you believe her?" He hesitated. "I want to." That was the truest thing he'd said in weeks. He stared into his cup. "She's due in 2 months. She keeps saying if she can just fix this before the baby comes, people will forgive her." "Forgiveness doesn't work on a deadline," I said softly. "It comes when we stop performing it." He nodded, though I could see the weight in his eyes. "They froze everything, the accounts, the house. She's staying with a friend. I think she wants to ask you for help." "Financial help?" He looked ashamed. "Maybe. She doesn't have anyone else. For a moment I said nothing. Then I sighed. Tell her to come tomorrow. Noon. He looked up sharply. You'll see her. Yes. He blinked, as if he hadn't expected mercy. But forgiveness, I've learned, is rarely about deserving. It's about choosing not to let bitterness rot what's left of you. The next day was cold and clear. I baked scones, not because I wanted to impress her, but because Harold always said a home should smell like welcome, even when the guests bring storms with them. When Clarissa arrived, she was barely recognizable. The glamour was gone, her makeup faint, her hair pulled back. Without the armor of appearance, she looked heartbreakingly human. She stood in the doorway, uncertain. May I come in? I said. She hesitated before stepping across the threshold, as though the air itself might judge her. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where she'd once offered to help me downsize. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the tick of the old clock and the faint rustle of rain beginning again outside. Finally she said, "They're saying I could face charges." Her voice cracked. I didn't steal everything they think I did. Some of it was creative accounting. I wanted to make the events look successful so we could attract bigger donors. It got out of control. I watched her, the way you watch a patient explain their own wound. And Michael. She swallowed. He's angry, but he still loves me. I nodded. He always did. Tears gathered in her eyes. I thought if I could make people admire us, he'd be proud. You'd be proud. Oh, Clarissa. I reached across the table, my hand resting gently over hers. Pride built on applause never lasts. It collapses the moment the clapping stops. She sobbed quietly, shoulders trembling. I don't know how to fix it. Start small, I said. Tell the truth, not to the papers, not to the board, but to yourself. The rest follows. She looked up, eyes red. Do you hate me? No, the word surprised even me with its steadiness. I don't hate you. I pity what greed did to you, and I hope you find your way back. She nodded, covering her face. I don't deserve your kindness. None of us ever really do, I said. That's what makes it grace. When she left, the house felt different, lighter, like a storm had passed through and taken the dust with it. I went to the garden. The rain had stopped, leaving beads of water clinging to the rose leaves. I touched one and watched it slide down, leaving a clean trail behind. Forgiveness is like that, I thought. It doesn't erase what happened, it just clears enough space for new things to grow. Weeks rolled into months. The investigation ended quietly. Clarissa accepted a plea deal. Fines, community service, probation. No prison. The papers called it mercy. I called it accountability. She gave birth to a baby girl in early spring. Michael named her Hope, a name that made me smile in ways I hadn't expected. When they brought the baby to visit me, Clarissa looked nervous, as if stepping onto sacred ground. She held the child close. Would you like to hold her? I nodded. The baby's warmth seeped through my arms, her tiny heartbeat steady against my chest. She smelled of milk and new beginnings. Hello, Hope, I whispered. Welcome to a world that's still learning how to be kind. Clarissa watched me, tears glistening. I've started volunteering, she said softly. No cameras. Just real work. I wanted you to know. I met her eyes. That's where real healing begins. Michael slipped his arm around her, and for the first time in years, I saw something genuine between them. No performance, no stage lights. Just family, fragile but trying. That night, I sat by Harold's photograph on the mantel and spoke to him as I often did. You were right, love, I said quietly. Kindness is the only revenge worth taking. The house creaked softly in reply, as if he'd nodded. I smiled. Outside, the moon rose over Fairview again, calm, indifferent, endlessly patient. Somewhere out there, people were still gossiping, still judging, still chasing the next spotlight. But here, in my little cottage, there was peace. Not the quiet of being forgotten, but the quiet of finally being understood. And that, I think, is the truest form of victory. I never planned on living a second life after 70. But I suppose life rarely asks for permission when it wants to begin again. After Clarissa's sentencing, the world returned to its rhythm. Gossip moved on, the papers filled with new scandals, and my name slipped quietly out of conversations. For the first time in decades, I was invisible again. And I loved it. There's a strange kind of freedom in being forgotten. No one expects perfection. No one watches to judge. You can simply live, and in that quiet, you can finally hear your own heart. The garden became my sanctuary. Each morning I'd step into the cool air, feeling the soil under my fingertips as I pruned, planted, and breathed. Harold used to say the earth doesn't care who you were yesterday, it only responds to what you give it today. Maybe that's why I found peace among the roses. They didn't ask for apologies, they only bloomed when tended. I began inviting a few young nurses from the local hospital over on weekends. They were kind, overworked, and a little lost, much like I'd been in my early days. We'd share tea, and I'd listen to their stories. "Miss Margaret," one of them said once, her eyes tired but bright, "how did you manage to stay kind in a world that isn't?" I smiled. I didn't always. But I learned that cruelty only feels powerful when you're hurt. Once you heal, kindness feels like the stronger choice. They'd nod, sometimes with tears, sometimes with laughter. Slowly, my little kitchen became a refuge, a place where stories could be told without judgment. Michael and Clarissa visited often. Clarissa was quieter now, softer somehow. Motherhood humbled her in ways no scandal ever could. She'd started working with a legitimate charity, one that supported widows and single mothers rebuilding their lives. One afternoon, she arrived holding baby Hope, who was now toddling and giggling at everything she saw. "Look who learned to say Gran," Clarissa said with a shy smile. I laughed as the child reached for me, her small hands warm and insistent. "Well, that's the best word I've heard all week." Clarissa lingered by the window, watching us. "I used to think wealth was about what people saw," she said quietly. "But you showed me it's about what you leave behind." I looked at her. Really looked. The arrogance was gone, replaced by humility. "We all learn in our own time," I said gently. "Some lessons just come wrapped in pain." She nodded. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I reached for her hand. "You gave me back my son's peace. That's more than enough." That night, after they left, I sat in my armchair with a cup of chamomile tea and watched the fireplace flicker. On the mantel were three things: Harold's photograph, a framed letter from the hospital honoring my years of service, and a small drawing Hope had made, a stick figure family with "Gran" written in uneven letters at the top. I smiled. This, not applause, not wealth, not the whispers of high society, was my legacy. Months passed, and spring came again. Fairview's annual charity ball was announced in the papers, this time organized by a new generation of leaders, sincere ones. To my surprise, they invited me as their guest of honor. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to stay home, to let the ghosts rest. But another part whispered that it was time, not for revenge or redemption, but for closure. So, on a crisp April evening, I found myself walking into the grand ballroom once more. The chandeliers sparkled. Music swelled. Faces turned as I entered, some surprised, some simply curious. I smiled at a few old acquaintances who'd once turned away when my name was scandalous. Life, it seemed, had a quiet sense of irony. I found my seat near the stage. The program was simple: speeches, dinner, and a presentation honoring those who'd contributed to the city's charities over the years. When my name was called, the room applauded politely. I stood, accepted the bouquet of lilies, and approached the microphone. For a moment I just looked out at them, these people who once defined what mattered, who believed status could replace sincerity. "Good evening," I began. A few years ago, I stood in a room much like this one and learned a lesson that changed my life. I learned that generosity isn't about the size of a donation, but the size of the heart behind it. The room grew still. Kindness, I continued, isn't a transaction. It's a reflection of who we are when no one's watching. When you give because it feels right, not because it looks right, that's when the world changes. There was a soft murmur, then silence again. I smiled. I don't need applause. I just hope, in some small way, we can all remember that true grace doesn't need a spotlight. I stepped back, the applause warm but restrained, and that was enough. After the event, a young reporter approached me. "Mrs. Langford, do you ever regret exposing what happened that night?" I thought for a moment. "Regret?" I said softly. "No. But I grieve for the pain it caused. Still, truth without compassion becomes cruelty. I did what I had to, and I've spent every day since trying to balance justice with mercy." She nodded, thoughtful. "That's not what most people would say." I smiled. Then maybe most people still have something left to learn. When I returned home that night, the moon was high and silver. The garden shimmered faintly, dew clinging to the petals. I walked among the roses, trailing my fingers along their stems. I thought of Harold, his laughter, his patience, his faith in me. I thought of Michael, Clarissa, and baby Hope. I thought of every mistake that had somehow led me back to grace. And then I whispered into the night, "Thank you." For the pain, for the lessons, for the quiet that followed. Because peace, I realized, isn't something that happens to you. It's something you decide to carry, even through storms. A few days later, I received a letter. It was from a young woman named Elise, one of the nurses who'd often visited. She wrote, "Miss Margaret, you once told me kindness is the strongest form of courage. Yesterday, I stood up for a patient when no one else would. I thought of you. Thank you for teaching me that compassion can be fierce." I read the letter twice, tears warming my eyes. Harold was right. The seeds we plant don't die when we do. They bloom in others, quietly, unexpectedly. So this is how my story ends, not with revenge, not with glory, but with peace. The kind that lives in the laughter of a child, in the hands of a nurse, in the soft rustle of rose leaves after rain. If you told me years ago that my greatest victory would come from forgiveness, I might have laughed. But now I know, forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the moment you stop letting the past define your worth. And that, I suppose, is the real charity, the giving of yourself even after you've been broken. So I'll keep giving, quietly, kindly, until my last dawn. Because the world will always have its glittering halls and cruel tongues. But it will also have people like us, mending what's been hurt, one act of grace at a time.